Jackie Fargo was the kind of guy who made people stop and stare the second he walked in. His real name was Henry Faggart, but nobody in Memphis ever called him that. To them, he was Jackie Fargo, the bleached blonde loudmouth who strutted around like he owned the place. When people talk about him, they sometimes frame it like one of those stories where a man rises to the top and then loses it all. There is some truth to that, but it is not that simple. Jackie Fargo did have problems. He lived hard, he made mistakes, and he didn't finish his career with piles of money or a peaceful retirement. But what he left behind was bigger than all of that. He started in North Carolina, where he wrestled at the YMCA as a teenager. He was strong, tough, and good enough to win tournaments. A promoter noticed him and told him he could actually make money as a professional. That was all Fargo needed to hear. He went off to Kentucky to train, and by the early 1950s, he was in the ring as Wildman Fargo. The name fit. At a time when most wrestlers kept their hair short and their acts serious, Fargo stood out. He grew his hair long, bleached it blonde, and acted outrageous. He would wear a bone in his hair just to shock people. He would pull women out of the audience and kiss them while everyone else booed. He strutted around the ring like he was the greatest man alive. Fans hated him for it, and that was exactly the point. He knew early on that wrestling was not just about holds and moves. It was about creating a reaction. If the crowd was screaming at you, you were doing your job. That strut of his became famous. People called it the Fargo strut, and it became his signature. With his chest out and his head held high, he would walk in a way that oozed arrogance. The crowd hated it, but other wrestlers loved it. They copied it. Jerry Lawler did it. Jeff Jarrett did it. Ric Flair made it part of his own act. That little walk Fargo came up with ended up becoming a part of wrestling's language. Fargo's biggest rise came when he teamed with Don Colt, who became Don Fargo. They were not brothers in real life, but in the ring they played the part, and together they became the fabulous Fargos. Everything about them matched. Their hair, their clothes, even down to the smallest details. They lived the act around the clock. If you saw them out in public, they were still the fabulous Fargos. People loved to hate them. They were cocky and loud and never stopped rubbing it in. That hatred-filled arenas everywhere they went. In 1957, they wrestled Argentina Roca and Miguel Perez at Madison Square Garden. More than 20,000 fans packed the building, the biggest wrestling crowd there in over 2 decades, and it was not even for the World Championship. It was for the fabulous Fargos. That is how hot they were. Jackie's style was not just about the show. He fought hard and rough. He swung chairs, he brawled through the crowd. He turned matches into wild fights. Decades later, people would talk about hardcore wrestling with blood and tables and weapons, but Fargo was already giving Memphis fans a taste of that chaos in the 1960s. Historians credit him as one of the pioneers of that style. Over his career, he held more than 45 tag team titles with different partners. Sometimes it was with Don, and sometimes it was with his real brother Sonny, who fans knew as Roughhouse Fargo. Roughhouse played the role of the crazy man, and together the brothers were wild, unpredictable, and always entertaining. Jackie never cared about keeping things neat or clean. He wanted to give people something messy and unforgettable. By the end of the 1960s, Jackie Fargo was the man in Memphis wrestling. If there was a big show, he was the one people came to see. He did not look like a Hollywood star, but that was part of the appeal. He was raw, loud, funny, and real. He connected with Memphis because he felt like one of them. Time eventually catches up with everyone. Fargo was not the young wild man anymore, but instead of fading away quietly, he helped lift up the next generation. That was Jerry Lawler. Fargo worked with him, feuded with him, and then passed the torch. Their matches together made Lawler look like the future of Memphis wrestling. That is exactly what happened. Lawler became the king, but even he admitted that without Jackie Fargo, there would have been no Jerry Lawler. Fargo built the stage and Lawler ran with it. Outside the ring, things were not as easy. Like many wrestlers from that time, Fargo lived rough on the road. There was constant travel, too much drinking, and a lifestyle that wore him down. He could be reckless, and sometimes his worst enemy was himself. By the time his career slowed down, he did not have the money or stability that people might expect from someone who had been such a star. Also, Jackie Fargo's story can't really be told without Jerry Lawler. The two are tied together forever because one helped make the other. Lawler might have gone on to become the king regardless, but it was Fargo who opened the door, and it was Fargo who finally stepped aside to let him through. What's funny is that their relationship didn't start in the ring at all. Jerry Lawler was just a kid with a talent for drawing. He used to send his caricatures and sketches into the Memphis wrestling TV program, and people noticed. Fargo, who had his own sign business at the time, saw the work and hired him to paint signs. That little job turned into a friendship, and that friendship eventually became a mentorship. Fargo showed Lawler the ropes, trained him, and gave him a chance in the wrestling business. It wasn't always smooth. In fact, it was rocky from the start. Fargo took the business seriously, and he was loyal to the territory system. So when he found out Lawler had been sneaking off to wrestle for outlaw promotions over in West Memphis, he was furious. Those outlaw shows were considered a threat to the established promoters, and guys like Fargo didn't take kindly to anyone stepping on their turf. Fargo called him up through a business partner and told him he would gather a crew of real wrestlers, head over the bridge, and break some arms if Lawler didn't knock it off. But Lawler didn't scare easy. He called Fargo's bluff. He kept showing up, kept working, and refused to back down. That stubbornness ended up being the very thing that won Fargo's respect. He even sent veterans like Tojo Yamamoto in the ring with Lawler, trying to beat the passion out of him. Instead of quitting, Lawler took the punishment and kept coming back. After a while, Fargo saw what he had on his hands. This kid wasn't just some wannabe, he had the guts and the brains to make it. That push and pull became the perfect backdrop for what turned into one of the most important feuds in Memphis wrestling. The storyline practically wrote itself. Lawler was the young star, cocky and confident, saying it was time for the old legend to move aside. Fargo was the kingpin who had ruled Memphis for years and wasn't ready to give up the throne. On TV, Lawler even called him out, saying, "Jackie Fargo, you're a legend, you've been the best, but I'm the one who's going to knock you off your throne." What made it so good was that it felt real. The punches in their matches didn't look like the usual work stuff. They looked rough and mean, like the two of them were actually fighting for their spot. People watching believed it, and that's what made it magic. When Lawler finally beat Fargo in the early 70s, it wasn't just another win, it was a passing of the crown. Lawler put on the robe, wore the crown, and became the king of Memphis. The city had its new hero, and Jackie Fargo had officially handed the reins to his protege. But here's what makes it even more interesting. The feud that looked so bitter on TV didn't stop them from teaming up later. Fargo and Lawler even won championships together, which showed the real respect between them. It was good business, and it was also a genuine connection. Fargo saw that helping Lawler rise up was the best way to secure the future of Memphis wrestling, and in doing so, he cemented his own legacy as much as Lawler's. For all his importance in the ring, Fargo's life outside of it was much more complicated. The same wild outlaw image he carried in wrestling sometimes spilled over into real life. In wrestling, the word outlaw had two meanings. It could mean working outside the established promotions, or it could mean living the kind of reckless lifestyle that got you into trouble. Jackie Fargo fit both definitions. The darkest example came in 1968 when he was arrested for beating his first wife, Fiorina. He pled guilty and paid a fine, but the incident left a stain that couldn't just be brushed off. It was a reminder that behind the charismatic entertainer fans loved was a man with serious flaws. Decades later, he ran into legal trouble again, this time on gambling charges. In 2005, he was convicted of running an illegal lottery and had gambling devices seized. It added fuel to the idea that Fargo struggled with gambling problems late in life. These things didn't erase what he accomplished in wrestling, but they showed the contradiction between the larger-than-life character fans adored and the real person behind the curtain. He also had a reputation for letting his temper get the best of him. One of the most infamous stories involved fellow wrestler Joe Galento. Galento had been running his mouth on a radio interview, revealing too much about the behind-the-scenes business. In those days, keeping kayfabe was sacred. Fargo took it personally. During a TV taping, he grabbed a nightstick and hit Galento in the head for real. The blow opened a nasty gash that needed 17 stitches. The whole thing ended up in court. Galento even told the judge that Fargo was fine when sober, but claimed he was afraid Fargo might shoot him if he was drunk. The case was eventually dismissed as long as the two of them stayed away from each other. It was a reminder that wrestling back then blurred the lines between performance and reality in a way that could spill into actual violence. Stories like that paint a picture of a man who lived with one foot in his character and one foot in his real life. Sometimes it was impossible to tell where Jackie Fargo, the performer, ended and Jackie Fargo, the man, began. That made him magnetic in the ring, but it also made him unpredictable outside of it. Looking back, his feud with Lawler and his wild life outside the ring tell two sides of the same story. Inside the arena, he was smart enough to recognize talent, humble enough to pass the torch, and shrewd enough to build Memphis wrestling into something bigger than himself. Outside of it, he wrestled with his own flaws, his temper, his vices, and his choices. That contradiction is what makes Jackie Fargo such a fascinating figure. He was both the king of the city and his own worst enemy. He helped create the next generation of stars while struggling to hold himself together. By the time Jackie Fargo stepped away from the ring in 1980, he had already given wrestling more than most men could in a lifetime. His official retirement didn't mean he disappeared, though. He popped back up here and there, most famously when he returned to manage the Fabulous Ones in the mid-1980s. Even in that short stint, you could tell he hadn't lost the touch. The crowd still reacted to him, the swagger was still there, and the strut that made him famous still carried weight. As the years went by, Fargo's role shifted from being the centerpiece of the show to being a respected elder. He was the guy the younger wrestlers looked up to, the one who had paved the road they were now walking. Even into the 1990s and early 2000s, he was still around at events, shaking hands, telling stories, and soaking up the love from fans who never forgot him. In 2002, when the brand new NWA TNA promotion held its very first pay-per-view, Fargo made an appearance. It was more than just a cameo. It was a statement that even decades after his prime, he still mattered. People in the industry often called him the godfather of Memphis wrestling, and it wasn't said lightly. They meant it. He had opened doors, drawn crowds, and inspired generations. That enduring respect is really the best answer to the idea that Jackie Fargo somehow lost everything. He may have made mistakes in his personal life, he may have had ups and downs, but he never lost the love of the fans or the respect of the business. If anything, the further he got from his active career, the more people seemed to appreciate what he had done. The official recognition followed too. Wrestling has plenty of flash-in-the-pan stars who shine brightly and then fade into memory. Fargo wasn't one of them. He was inducted into the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame in 1996, a place reserved for those whose influence is undeniable. Later came the NWA Hall of Fame in 2013 and the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2014. Each one was a reminder that his work wasn't just about Memphis or even just about tag team wrestling. It was about shaping the whole direction of the sport. Those honors are permanent. They put his name in history books, and no arrest record or personal failing could erase them. Still, time eventually caught up with him. In his later years, Fargo's health began to decline. He battled pneumonia in both lungs in 2011, a scare that signaled how fragile things were getting. Then in June of 2013, just 2 days before he would have turned 83, he passed away after a week in the hospital with congestive heart failure. For a man who had spent his whole life larger than life, strutting into arenas, drawing heat, throwing punches, and carrying himself like a star, it was a quiet end, but death didn't dim his legend. If anything, it only made it shine brighter. The response to his passing told the real story of what he left behind. Fans flooded his obituary page with tributes. They called him their hero, their idol, the reason they had fallen in love with wrestling in the first place. Some remembered him as a showman who made their childhood nights at the arena unforgettable. Others remembered him as a kind man who had taken the time to shake their hand, pose for a photo, or share a laugh. Many of them used the same phrase, a true gentleman. That's the part that makes Fargo's story so human. On paper, you can read about the arrests, the gambling charge, or the temper that sometimes got the best of him. Those things are real and they're part of his story, but they don't define it. The people who actually met him, who looked him in the eye, who grew up watching him, they saw someone more complicated. They saw the flaws, sure, but they also saw the warmth, the humor, and the spark that made him unforgettable.